Okay, think about this for a second. How does a global superpower, a country that defined half of the 20th century, just disappear? It sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to the Soviet Union, and today we're going to dig into how it all went down. And our story really kicks off with this image, one that everybody knows. November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall. I mean, the ultimate symbol of the Cold War, of that deep divide between East and West. It's literally being torn down by everyday people. This wasn't just a crack in the wall, it was a crack in the entire world order. And that leads us right to the heart of the matter. You see, the wall falling, that was a symptom, not the actual disease. The real question, the one we're tackling, is how the Soviet Union itself, the world's #2 superpower, could unravel so quickly after holding on for 70 years. To really get the collapse, we first have to understand what was collapsing. So let's take a look inside the Soviet system, peek behind that famous iron facade. So what exactly was the Soviet system? Well, it all started with the Socialist Revolution back in 1917. It was this massive, grand experiment to build a totally equal society. The state, run by the Communist Party, owned pretty much everything, planned the entire economy from the top down, and yeah, there was absolutely no room for political opposition. The whole system was just a bundle of contradictions. On the one hand, you've got this industrial giant, a true powerhouse with massive energy resources. It guaranteed everyone a basic safety net, state-funded healthcare, education, welfare. But, and this is a big but, the system was incredibly fragile. It was rigid, authoritarian, and the economy was stagnating, churning out notoriously shoddy goods. Plus, Russia was clearly running the show, which did not sit well with the 14 other republics. This joke just nails the mood perfectly. In a place with no free speech, humor becomes a weapon. It perfectly captures that huge gap between the government's propaganda, we have mountains of potatoes, and the grim reality of shortages and control that people were living with day in and day out. So into this incredibly fragile system steps one man, Mikhail Gorbachev. And the ironic thing is, his big gamble to try and save the Soviet Union is what ended up speeding up its death. By the time we get to the 1980s, the Soviet machine was just grinding to a halt. The cost of the arms race was absolutely crippling, and a planned economy just couldn't keep up with Western technology. So reform wasn't just a good idea, it was an absolute necessity for survival. Gorbachev's big plan had two parts. First, you had perestroika, which means restructuring. That was all about jump-starting the economy. Then you had glasnost, which means openness. The idea there was to bring in a little democracy, to loosen the party's iron grip on everything. The goal was to fix the system, not to tear it down. But here's where it all goes wrong. These reforms created this political tug-of-war. For the old-school communist hardliners, Gorbachev was moving way too fast and threatening their power. But for the reformers and the general public, he was moving way too slow. He got stuck right in the middle, and he ended up losing pretty much everybody's support. And that internal conflict just set the stage for the final dramatic act. It's like Gorbachev opened Pandora's box, and now things were spiraling out of control at a speed nobody could believe. I mean, just look at this timeline. It is astounding. In just 3 short years, a 70-year-old system completely evaporates. It starts with independence movements in the Baltics, then bam, the Berlin Wall falls. The communists lose their 72-year monopoly on power, a failed coup. It all comes to a head on Christmas Day 1991. Gorbachev resigns and the Soviet flag is lowered for the very last time. Just gone. So, while the failing economy created the need for change, it was nationalism that really delivered the knockout punch. Gorbachev's policy of openness basically uncorked all these long-suppressed desires for independence in the republics. And that turned out to be a force that nobody, not even him, could put back in the bottle. And right out of this chaos, a new leader emerges, Boris Yeltsin. He becomes this national hero when he famously stands on a tank to defy the hardline coup. He becomes the first ever elected president of Russia, and really the face of a brand new post-Soviet world. But what came next was definitely not the easy freedom everyone had hoped for. The shift from communism to capitalism was brutal. It was a process that got the name shock therapy. And shock therapy is a pretty accurate name. Instead of a slow, gradual change, the idea, pushed by Western institutions, was to do it all at once. Rip the Band-Aid off, immediately privatize everything the state owned, embrace the free market, and create a capitalist economy basically overnight. To give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, just think. About 90% of all of Russia's industries, we're talking factories, oil fields, the whole shebang, were just put up for sale. This whole process has been called the largest garage sale in history, and for good reason. Hugely valuable state companies were sold for pennies on the dollar, usually to well-connected insiders. Ordinary citizens got these vouchers to buy shares, but most were so broke they just sold their vouchers on the black market for cash. The economic result was devastating. Get this, a full decade after the reforms started, Russia's economy was actually smaller than it was during the final stagnant years of the Soviet Union. It was all shock and really no therapy. And the human cost of all this was just staggering. Hyperinflation completely wiped out people's life savings. The old social safety net, gone. Poverty went through the roof. And in the vacuum, a powerful mafia rose up to control huge chunks of the new economy. For millions of people, the dream of freedom had turned into a nightmare of just trying to survive. Now, the fall of the Soviet Union didn't just change things for one part of the world. It fundamentally redrew the map for the entire globe, creating the world that we live in right now. When you boil it all down, its legacy comes down to three huge changes. First, the Cold War was over. The big ideological fight was done. Second, the world became unipolar, with the US as the only superpower left standing. And third, 15 brand new countries popped up on the map, from Ukraine to Kazakhstan. But of course, this story doesn't just end there. The collapse also unleashed a wave of instability. New conflicts, civil wars, ethnic tensions, they erupted all across the former Soviet space, and many of those conflicts are still shaping our world today. So, in the end, an empire just vanished. The world order was flipped on its head, and millions of lives were changed forever. The ghost of the Soviet Union still haunts our headlines, which really makes you ask, what can the sudden fall of a superpower teach us about how fragile the systems we rely on today might actually be?